Well, it's combine time. I think it gets underway this coming Tuesday. You're off to Indy because when you work for NFL.com, that's what you do. 11 former Bama players at the combine. That matches Clemson, the team that beat them in the national championship game. It's just remarkable. Chase, and I know you'll remember this well. You were covering Alabama when Saban got here. You got one or two guys at the combine, you were doing something. And in fact, that 2008 draft after his first season, no one was drafted for the University of Alabama. It's hard to believe now, isn't it?
Not a soul. Yeah, it was. I was in the indoor facility on the day that Alabama held that pro day in 2008, coming off of that 2007 season. And you could hear your own voice echo in there. It seemed like it was so empty. And now you go to an Alabama pro day, and there's barely any elbow room.
Yeah, now it's must-see pro day for not just the scouts, but general managers, head coaches show up. It's unbelievable. Hey, listen, as somebody who's covered the combine, and I never have and may not ever get an opportunity to, we see what's on television, and we know, the importance of the interviews and the accurate height, weights, and watching these guys work. But I guess my question, Chase, is, again, I know the combine's very, very important, but let's say you've got a guy who is a surefire first rounder going into the combine on paper, watching his film on the football field, and he doesn't perform well at the combine. Maybe he's not as fast as they would like him to be, or he didn't have as many reps at 225. What is the balance between a guy being able to play football and maybe not having a good combine performance? How does that impact that player?
I think typically what scouts will tell you, what scouts have certainly told me is that the combine kind of acts like a shakeup for them versus what they've already seen on tape. By the time you get to the combine at the end of February, early March, all these prospects have been looked at pretty hard on film, and based on what they see on that film, there are certain expectations of each guy, what he should run, what he's going to do in some of the agility drills, et cetera. And if the numbers at the combine don't match the tape, then that signals the scouts that we got to go back and look at more tape and see if we can get a handle on why this guy is either not as good an athlete as we thought he was, or in some cases, maybe he's a better athlete than we thought he was.
The flip side of that, and I always use Mike Mamula as an example, going back to the 90s, although he was a pretty good football player. He came to the combine and just lit it up, the Boston College defensive end, and parlayed that all the way into a number 7 overall pick by the Eagles. And like I said, he was a serviceable NFL player, but his combine numbers were just off the charts. Let's say you got a guy who's not thought of maybe as a top-tier football player, but he comes to this combine and he just lights it up. How does that impact his draft? Does it really boost his stock, or will people eventually still go back to the tape, particularly from the fact that there have been mistakes made in the past where guys tested so well, but they weren't necessarily great football players?
It can boost the stock, but it never carries the stock. And what I mean by that is it can solidify a guy's draft position if he does well there, or even maybe bump it up a little bit. But at the end of the day, the film evaluation is going to be the baseline for the scouting reports. And so the athleticism and the testing at the combine kind of refines it, but it doesn't control it, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. All right, Alabama with 11 players at the combine, and we'll get to a little bit on the draft in a moment. But Quinnen Williams, Deontay Thompson, Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, Isaiah Buggs, Jonah Williams, Irv Smith Jr., Mac Wilson, Christian Miller, Ross Pierce-Baker, Savion Smith. Out of that 11, and of course, several are going to be first-round draft picks, who do you think will really do well at the combine? If you had to pick 3 or 4 that will be combine leaders from the Alabama contingent, who would they be?
Probably start with Josh Jacobs at running back. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's a better overall athlete than Damian Harris is. I think his numbers are going to be highly impressive. I think he'll solidify his position, which right now the projections are that Josh Jacobs is likely to go in the first round, which no one would have ever thought of 6 months ago. But that's the kind of year he had for Alabama, even though he wasn't getting all the carries. Of course, he split a lot of carries with Damian Harris, with Najee Harris, et cetera. But I think Josh Jacobs will do extremely well in Indianapolis. I expect Quinnen Williams to do well for sure, particularly in the agility drills, the 3-cone drill, the short shuttle, and those types of things. And those drills, I think, are probably a little bit more important for defensive tackles than, something like the 40-yard dash, which is more indicative of, skill guys, receivers, and cornerbacks, et cetera. And I think Mack Wilson should do pretty well at the combine as well. Extremely athletic linebacker. Didn't have the greatest year on tape this past fall. I was a little bit surprised that he decided to come out, but the guy can run, and that'll be on full display in Indianapolis.
Chase Goodbread with us from NFL.com and Crimson Cover TV. I want to ask you about Quinnen because I was talking with someone the other day that I really respect, and I'm not going to give their name because I didn't get permission to use it, but they're very knowledgeable. And I had actually even talked with somebody else about this, but then when this person told me, it kind of reiterated it, that Quinnen, in his opinion, his play really fell off following the Mississippi State game. Once it was certified that he was going to be a high first-round draft pick and that everyone knew that he was going to come out, that he didn't play well, down the stretch in the Citadel game or the Auburn game or in the playoffs. Have you heard that from anybody else, and could that impact his stock at all? Have you heard that he did not play as well once he kind of established himself as a first rounder?
I've not been told that by any scouts, and I haven't gone back and evaluated his play myself, like specifically watching play-by-play. Excuse me, my dog's a big Quinnen Williams fan.
Well, what he specifically said, Chase, this will help you. He said that his conditioning fell off. He started asking out on plays. He didn't give the same effort, and that generally just felt like that the status that he had achieved impacted his play, and for some teams that might be a red flag.
Yeah, that's new for me, for sure. That's definitely not something I've heard. I thought he played pretty darn well in the playoffs. Obviously, Alabama's defense got lit up in the championship game, but I really feel like I thought he made plays myself. Not heard that. Doesn't mean it's not true. Doesn't mean that's not being whispered. It doesn't mean that's not being talked about. But if that's the case, and that's the overwhelming feeling in the scouting community,
you would have heard it.
It's gonna. It might not have heard it by now, but you definitely hear it by next week.
But either way, he's a top 5 overall pick, right?
I don't think there's any question he's going to go really fast. Top 5, likely. I would think top 10 for sure.
All right, you've got 11 guys at the combine. Alabama's been the gold standard for the NFL draft. We know that. There have been other years when we've heard, 5 or 6 possible first-round picks, and very rarely do you get as many as you're projected to get. This year, I've seen as in the mock drafts, and I looked at about 30 of them this morning to get ready for my interview with you. I've seen as few as 2 from Alabama in the first round, Jonah and Quinnen, and I've seen as many as 6, believe it or not. Odds are it's probably going to be somewhere between 2 and 6, right?
Yeah, I think 3 and 4 tends to be the sweet spot for Alabama in the Nick Saban era. I think the most likely 3 to go in the first round are Quinnen Williams, Jonah Williams, and Josh Jacobs. Now, could it be more than that? Could they get a 4th in there? Yeah, they could. Deontay Thompson, maybe a guy who slips in there, but I do think those 3 guys, at this point anyway, I think those are the solid ones. If you wanted me to put an over-under on how many Alabama guys will get picked in the first round, I'd probably set it at 3 or 3.5.
The 11 guys at the combine, will all of them get drafted?
I think there's a really good chance of it, and I wouldn't normally say that. I mean, typically when Alabama sends, that's a fairly normal number for Alabama. Mm-hmm. They often send you double digits, but usually on the back end of those double digits are fringe guys who, Robert Foster, for instance, last year would have been a fringe guy. He went undrafted, had a heck of a rookie year for the Bills, but that's an example of a guy kind of on the tail end of the combine participation list who, you figure that guy's probably not going to get picked, and Foster didn't, and it's pretty common. This year, no. This year, I think all 11 of these guys for Alabama have a really good chance of getting their name called at some point. Savion Smith, probably toward the back end of this group, maybe the last guy if you were going to rank them 1 through 11 on the likelihood of getting picked. Savion Smith might be at the bottom or toward the bottom, but he plays a premium position. He's got some length. He's got some speed. What he doesn't have is a lot of tape because he was a one-year starter at Alabama and lost his starting job in the middle of the season. So the film on him is going to be a little bit of a donut for scouts. But at the combine, he'll measure and run, I think, the way NFL clubs want cornerbacks to measure and run, and that'll help him for sure come April.
Chase Goodbread with us. I want to ask you about Christian Miller because to me he's a really interesting prospect. I think he's going to check off all the positive boxes when it comes to interviews and character and family background and what kind of citizen he is. And he's a good football player. He is a guy that seems to struggle to keep on weight. He might be kind of a tweener. He's been injury prone, but he's been an effective pass rusher when he's played. And there's no doubt not having him against Clemson really impacted that defense. What are you hearing on Christian Miller, and where do you think he'll be slotted as a draft pick? A third rounder, or possibly could he go higher?
I think third round's probably the top end for Christian Miller. Or third day is probably more likely. He is small, and he's a hard guy to project as a guy who's going to be able to beat offensive tackles at the NFL level because in the NFL those offensive tackles they're more athletic, right? I mean, he sees 300-pounders all the time at the college level, but you don't see him as athletic as you do on Sundays. It's going to be hard for him to get around the edge in the NFL. Doesn't mean he can't do it. He did come up with a pretty big year in his final season for the Crimson Tide. I think he had 8 or 8.5 sacks or so. So that was the best production of his career. But between the injuries that he's had and his thin frame, I think he's probably a third-day pick.
You mentioned Robert Foster and Levi Wallace, too. Both went undrafted, both hooked on with the Bills and had terrific rookie years. It's not just about your guys getting drafted. It's about, quality maybe through free agency. Does having the success that Foster and Wallace enjoyed help maybe guys like Hell Henches, Lester Cotton, that probably won't get drafted, but that might get a look in an NFL training camp, not just because of their ability, but because of the track record of Alabama putting guys in the NFL?
Yeah, I think the way Nick Saban runs his program, which is in a lot of ways like an NFL program, I think that helps anybody in that kind of situation. If you're an NFL club, some might sign 7, 8, 9 undrafted free agents right after the draft. Other clubs will have bigger groups, maybe 15 guys, but and there's a pool of money to pay those guys, and you pay what you want, and that's how you end up with different numbers. But if you're an NFL team, you finish the draft, and you're looking around at who do you want to sign as an undrafted free agent, I do think there's an attraction to the Clemsons and the Alabamas, et cetera, because those guys are going to be a little bit more ready for what they're going to face than maybe somebody from a smaller school, maybe somebody who played for a different coach. So I think, I don't know if Foster and Wallace and some of those other guys' track record maybe helps them, but I think the program itself is kind of what drives that.
Chase, is Irv Smith Jr. a first-rounder in your opinion?
I don't think he's going to go in the first round, but I think 5 years from now, when we look at where all these guys are in their NFL careers, he might be looked at as a guy that should have been picked in the first round. I'm big on Irv Smith with the way he can make yards after the catch. He's athletic. He can block too. Now he's a physical. He can certainly run well enough to play in the slot maybe a little bit and get downfield and be more than just a short route tight end.
You mentioned Mack Wilson earlier, and the fact you think that he'll test well at the combine. I do too. I think he's a terrific athlete. Still, some scratched their head when he came out, based on the fact that even though at times he's a very productive player, This year, there were a lot of instances that were pointed out on social media. You don't have to be a scout. People will find the where he was lined up wrong, or he just absolutely whiffed, or he didn't cover the right guy. He had kind of I think you'll agree with this, kind of a choppy up and down junior season, yet he comes out. The fact that he is such a good athlete and he will test well, yet there are some concerns about him actually as a football player on the field. How do you think that balances out with these teams, and where do you think he winds up being picked?
Yeah, I think he's a second-day guy. Second day of the draft should be rounds 2 and 3. That's a pretty big range, but I do think that's where he's likely to end up in the draft. And, yeah, the combine should help him because that guy, he can really run. And one of his strong suits on the field is pass coverage. And you're right, he wasn't always there with the run fits this past year, and NFL scouts are going to see that, and they're not going to like it. That's the bottom line. That being said, covering the pass is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the linebacker's job in the NFL, and that's what he does best. So he'll be able to show, they'll put him through some field drills in Indianapolis as well, where they'll have him drop into coverage. And, of course, it won't be a live situation. He'll be doing it in shorts. But he's going to be smooth with all of that. He's going to be able to find the ball in the air better than most of the linebackers there. And that's going to help him maybe as much as anything else in terms of the physical testing.
Chase, before we let you go, a couple more questions. I want to get your and I know you're at the Senior Bowl and you've been at the All-Star games, you're going to be at the Combine, and you talk with a lot of people with your NFL connections. What's been the feedback you've gotten, if you have, just talking with people, on what happened in that national championship game that Clemson wound up playing so well and being so dominant, and that Alabama, to some degree, helped them and was just imploded a little bit? What's been the takeaway from NFL people, if you've talked to them, about what happened in that national championship game? I'm curious.
To be honest, you can talk to some NFL people, and they'll tell you who they think played well and maybe didn't play well.
They're not really even worried about the overall result, huh?
They are, they're totally zoned in on the individual and not the team, for sure. But it was Clemson exposed some things for Alabama defensively. There's no doubt about it, and those tapes are going to get watched just as closely as any other during the season.
Well, since you're based here in Tuscaloosa, I know you continue to follow Alabama very closely. Your takeaway from all of the coaching changes, and do you think this staff, I know last year they had an excellent recruiting staff, but overall, is this staff an upgrade, in your opinion, from the staff they had last year? I know Nick Saban must think it is. Yeah,
ask me that in a year from now, I guess, when we see how some of these guys have recruited and what they've done on the field. But we touched on the official 2019 coaching staff a little bit for the Crimson Cover airing, which will be tonight at 6:30 on WVUA. Pete Golding moving in as the full-time defensive coordinator. That'll be bear watching. Obviously, Steve Sarkisian is going to be a high-profile OC for sure. A lot of eyeballs will be on him after Mike Loxley pretty much led the best offense in the history of the school last year. So going to be some pressure on this staff. Nick Saban's had to deal with probably more turnover this winter than any year he's been at Alabama. So we'll find out how quickly those guys kind of gel.
Last question. Kyler Murray, it looks like for sure it's going to be football over baseball. We know he's dynamic. We know he's an incredible athlete. I mean, I thought watching the Orange Bowl that it was like, chasing a water bug around for those Alabama defenders. Yet he's small. I mean, by NFL standards, and I know that's changed the perception of the shorter quarterbacks in recent years, but he maybe is going to come in at 5'10" at best. I got a feeling that depending on who you talk to, that the opinions are probably going to be a little more diverse than people expect. I think there are going to be some of these NFL people who don't consider him a first-round talent. Others certainly will. What's your best guess on Kyler Murray? I've seen some people say that he should go in the top 5 picks. And again, I've seen some other people say, no way would you use a top 5 pick on this guy. What's your gut feeling on Kyler Murray?
I won't be surprised if somebody picks him late in the first round.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
I'll be very surprised if he goes high in the first round, but it won't shock me at all if he goes late in the first round. Won't shock me if he goes high second round. He's definitely a phenomenal talent. He's definitely not, obviously, the prototypical quarterback in terms of size, but he is coming into the NFL at a time where NFL coaches and personnel executives are more open to smaller quarterbacks and more athletic quarterbacks than they've probably ever been. So, now, the thing about it is, though, if you draft a guy, especially if you invest a first-round pick on him, you gotta make some changes to your offense if it's not already tailored to what he does best. And so it's a commitment more than just to Murray if you draft him. It's a commitment to make some fundamental alterations maybe in the offense and even in the personnel around him as well. So it's if you buy him with a first round pick, you buy into a lot more.
Well said. Do you think he'll be in your opinion, do you think he'll be a successful NFL starting quarterback?
I think he can be. Yeah, you got to stay healthy. Obviously, that goes for any quarterback. And with a smaller guy, you worry about durability. But if the guy stays healthy and he's in a system that adjusts to him the way it's going to need to, I don't see why he couldn't be a success.
Outstanding, Chase. Folks, follow Chase on Twitter at Chase Goodbread. Watch for him on Crimson Cover TV Friday nights at 6:30 on WVOA 23. And read his information at NFL.com. He'll be at the Combine next week. Thanks a lot, Chase.
All right, Gary. Thanks.